So let's go ahead and get started. I know you already were talking to some of our presenters, but I want to officially welcome Doctors Heather Strine-Patterson from Appalachian State University and Dr. Alice Mitchell from University of Maryland College Park. They're here on behalf of the Journal of Student Affairs Inquiry, Improvement, Impact, our new title. Also, Heather is the inaugural Director of Student Affairs Assessment at Appalachian State University. And she has over 15 years of experience. She has a lot of experience in advising, career development, residence life. She's also a great strategic leader, which I've been beneficial of that experience as well. And Dr. Alice Mitchell is the associate editor here, but also an associate affiliate assistant professor in student affairs concentration at the University of Maryland College Park. And she's had a lot of experience in student affairs as well, in residence life, career development, leadership, etc. And so they're here today to talk about the new journal and talk about their discussions they've had over the past year with the editorial team and how they're excited to roll out this new name, but also the new partnership, its new home, and just overall improvements in the process, which I think is going to be really great for practitioners. So they're going to discuss the changes today. And really our desired outcome is just to kind of give you all like a slice of what's been happening behind the scenes and hopefully encourage scholarship in our field. So I'm going to pass it over to Heather and Alice to get it started and get us rolling.
Thanks, Renee. I'm excited to talk with y'all today, and that there's so many people that are interested in the journal and the updates and potentially contributing as authors, or honestly, even just being engaged as readers, right? Like, we're all in this field, and where do we get up-to-date current information about what's really happening out there and how we can all be a larger national team of student affairs assessment practitioners. So Alice, do you want to say hi in case folks haven't seen your face? I don't know how people set up their Zoom views.
Yeah, well, I'll say brief hi. Like Heather, I am very excited to be involved in this endeavor. I just think the positioning of this journal, as we've had a chance to rethink it a bit, is just spot on. You know, I think you all are going to be very excited as well. So I'll pass the baton back to Heather.
You all probably saw the blog post with the announcement, but we want to kind of go through that, but go into a little bit more detail. And if there are questions you have, chat those. I know Renee is going to be a great moderator, and we're great to answer those questions as they come up, or hold them until the end, whatever you're most comfortable with. But really, this all came about, if we kind of set context for those of you that know me, I feel like I'm a storyteller, and it's all about context. I became the editor of the journal in December 2019. So that was a great time to become the editor of a journal right before the pandemic. So, you know, the pandemic hit pretty soon after that. We had to pause submissions, both in part because we had a small review team. We needed to build up the review team of the journal, but then we also needed to allow practitioners and folks to start submitting for the journal. So it really took a couple of years. While I did become the editor in 2019, it probably wasn't until 2022, after the pandemic, that we really began getting submissions again. And folks were able to think about writing in addition to their jobs and other things that we were doing, right? So around that time, we had some transition in the associate editors. And Alice came on as an associate editor, and Dr. Caleb Keith at IUPUI came on as another associate editor. Caleb had actually been a reviewer with the journal since its inception. And so Caleb and Alice came on, and whenever you get, you know, a new leadership team, it's always a great opportunity to review where you are. You know, people asking questions helps highlight challenges or things you've been thinking about, but maybe haven't verbalized and really thought through. And, you know, one of their questions was like, hey, you know, what kind of submissions come into the journal? And what are your conversations with potential authors like, right? What are common things that you're saying back to authors that submit manuscripts? And I said, you know, sometimes I think, you know, it's called the Journal of Student Affairs Inquiry, right? And I've looked back over the first issue of the journal, and if we don't look back at that first issue to say, how do we define inquiry? We think, well, I want to inquire. I want to learn, right? I just want to know more. And that was really apparent in the manuscripts we were getting, right? And so it was hard to decipher some of the manuscripts that were coming in. Well, what makes it a unique niche, right, for JSAIII? Why is this article fit or not with this journal as compared to other journals? So that really prompted some great conversation around the unique niche of JSAIII and contributing not only to the field of student affairs assessment, but to the field of student affairs, right? Why would an article be submitted to JSAIII rather than like a college student development, Journal of College Student Development, right? Because a lot of articles we might be getting was just like, here's something that we know about students. But what we all know as assessment practitioners is like, well, what do we do with that? How is that tied to goals? How do we work on improving objectives and outcomes that we might have? Or how might we use that to demonstrate the impact of the work that's happening in the co-curricular spaces of student affairs assessment, or student affairs, not student affairs assessment. And so we really talked about inquiry being something that, yes, are we inquiring? Is there a measurement component to what we're talking about? Absolutely. Is that it? No. And so we wanted to start to emphasize improvement. And we wanted to start to emphasize, where do we demonstrate impact? Dr. Serafini, in our latest issue that was put out this past, I think, March of 2023, wrote an article, and at the end of the article, she really called on student affairs practitioners, professionals, assessment professionals to publish. You know, we're not publishing necessarily the great work that we're doing and what we're learning on our campuses through the assessment process. So she really called people in to publish. And we wanted to create an obvious way that we're calling people in to share those impact stories, right? To share those improvement stories that we learn through the assessment process. And so one day in Caleb and Alice and my conversations, I think I sat back and just said, I mean, what would happen if we added improvement to the name? And they were like, we kind of like that. Let's sit on that. And we kept liking it. And we brought it to Alyssa, Brooks Nelson, and Renee, and we shared it with them, and they were like, we love it. And Alyssa said, what if we add improve or impact? And Alice said, your and Renee and Alyssa's eyes lit up, because we're all being asked to, do impact stories, right? We're all being asked to do the impact reports. We see those all over the place now. It's no longer just the annual report, it's your impact report. We're seeing that across the field. And so, we were like, this is a good direction, right? To really hone in on this a little bit more. So that's where the journal has expanded the focus. When I look back on some of that issue 1, I see words in there like improvement and impact. Those are in there. And what I feel like this rename, is it a refocus, a clarification of focus? I think the roots are there if you look, but it's just putting the words out there so that we're saying this journal isn't just about learning because we're interested, right? It is about learning and what do we do with that learning on our campuses? How do we improve with that learning? How do we share our impact from the things that we've learned through that assessment process? So that's really where the expanded focus and rename came from. Oh, Alice, do you have anything to add to that?
Just want to reinforce the focus on impact. I think that all of us are feeling that. Now we need to really focus on getting that out in the field where we can all see it. I also want to highlight, Heather, your point about calling people in. As practitioners, we've got our heads down there doing our stuff, right? But we also need to be writing it down so others can see it and get their ideas as well. And so this journal is really about dragging each of us out of our little closets, if you will, doing good work, and really supporting potentially new authors who may be a little skittish about writing it down, but really offering a supportive framework to toss some ideas around with Heather and me and others, and then get started on some writing in a way that makes sense for your practitioner schedule.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions about that or thoughts? See Renee in the chat put, how do y'all feel about the addition of improvement and or impact to the journal's name? Anyone want to chime in? It's being recorded, so I can understand if you want to put the pause, but I'll keep going then. The next thing we really, and we'll get to the manuscript types of the journal a little bit later before we talk about submitting proposals. But in the process of talking about just the position of the journal, there were, yesterday, SAIII announced how they became an official nonprofit, which is just fantastic. And I really commend the current board for their work to make that happen. And I say that because, and I commented on LinkedIn, I've personally seen the challenges of not being an official nonprofit. And it's been, challenging in ways for the journal that there's actual costs to the journal. So one of the things when Alice and Caleb came on was like, guys, we don't have a sponsor. We have no money. I've been paying out of pocket for Scholastica for years now. And, this is a challenge with an amazing organization, but that, it doesn't have revenue generation. And that just got us talking, right, about opportunities and options. One of the things that we thought about was also some of the challenges with the journal being directly within SAIII is that if SAIII wanted to submit an article on behalf of the field or something like that, I always felt a potential ethical dilemma with that, right? That there wasn't like a little bit of separation of church and state kind of with the journal and the organization. And so we looked at talked about different options. And Caleb, being an associate editor at the time, he was working with the Center for Leading Improvements in Higher Education and the Assessment Institute and the other great things that are happening at IUPUI. And he said, we have our libraries host open access journals like this. And I think we could help and we could create a collaboration with the Center for Leading Improvements in Higher Education, SAIII, and the journal that could really support one another in ways to help the journal be financially sustainable in the future, but also just create a great partnership between the organizations. And I know SAIII and the center have been working on that. And so we approached Renee about those options. and the board. And Renee was just like, this sounds great, go for it, you know, because we still want to be, and we still are super strong partners. And that doesn't mean if we're not like nested within SAL specifically that we cannot keep doing that, because really, and kind of the title of today's session is that this is our journal, right? This is our field's journal. And that hasn't changed in this new partnership with the Center for Leading Improvements in Higher Education. It's actually kind of, I think, strengthened that. And gives us new opportunities to partner with the Assessment Institute, right? Like somebody's presenting at the Assessment Institute, like this would be a great article to elevate, to turn this proposal and this presentation into an article. And so we've really moved forward with that move, and all of that's official. And we're up with the Indiana University Libraries page, and that's now the site for the journal. Questions around that, or Alice or Renee on that one? Things to add?
I just want to point your attention to the chat here. There is a question around not fully understanding the title change.
Okay.
And just so if you want to maybe elaborate a little bit more on not just why we decided to change that, but maybe the accessibility of scholarship, or maybe go into a little bit more depth about that.
Yeah, I'm trying to look for that. So I think part of that is really trying to clarify, even part of that title change, I think, is clarifying even the types of manuscripts that we hope to get. So the comment, because I don't know if on a recording it will show these comments, fully understand why there is a need for the title change. So part of the need for the title change, I think, was really to get an alignment between manuscripts that were being submitted and the kinds of things that we wanted to publish, right? So we were getting more manuscripts that might just be describing something that somebody learned about students. So it was heavy in the editorial process to not just say, here's what we've learned about students, but here is then what we can do with that learning about students. How did that help, improve goals, outcomes, or our objectives for students in the division at that institution? And so it was heavier on the editorial process, which could then be more frustrating also for authors and reviewers, because there might be more rounds of that review process. And so that was part of where we saw a need and a challenge with the kinds of manuscripts that we were getting weren't necessarily in alignment with the intention, I think, the original intention around what inquiry meant, right? I think when you look back at that first issue, like I said, in different sentences and spaces, it would mention improvement, or it would mention impact. And really, we were just trying to pull that together to make that not only more, concise in a title, to say this is what the scope of this journal is, but doing it in a title provides that clarity for potential authors. Does that add clarity?
Thank you. That helps a lot. That makes a lot of sense.
Perfect. Okay. Other questions as we're going? I love questions. Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just follow up. So this is really exciting. I think everything you presented here sounds awesome. A question that has come to mind, you just mentioned the scope of article that you're looking for with the journal. And I was wondering if you could perhaps speak to the kinds of articles. In my mind, it seems that there could be some that focus on like the findings of particular assessments that, maybe we partnered with the chemistry department to administer an assessment in which we find that students with a growth mindset and a sense of belonging have higher grades in chemistry. So it'd be about the findings. Or And or are you looking for articles that are more about the methodology of here's some innovative way that we developed an instrument, or here's we came up with our own score for something, or here's how we incentivize students to complete a project. So, or here's the analytic cycle that we use to motivate departments that historically had been reluctant to do assessment. So it wouldn't necessarily talk about the specific results of a given assessment, the findings, but it would talk about the methodology and the sort of context or the culture to set something into motion that would yield results that could then measure impact.
All of the above.
Okay.
Right? Which to me is exciting. We have 4 different manuscript types that we're accepting. So in some ways, we've tried to simplify kind of the number of different manuscript types, but within that, I think there's a lot of flexibility, right, on what that looks like. So one of the manuscript types we kind of have up front is called, we're calling field notes. And the reason we're calling it field notes is, you might see it in another journal called like editorial or editor notes. And I was again like, I don't know that I want to write every single thing on that, or I don't know that Alice wants to, and I don't know that I should be. But what we know is that there's lots of great people in our field that might write something about the field, like thought pieces, right? Or, something along those lines. And there could be lots of different things about field notes. So there's a broader thing around field notes, which might be observations of the field, right? Or something like that. It might be the SAL landscape study, right? The advancement committee with SAL publishes, write something for the landscape study, right? Then we have a section called the scholarship of inquiry, improvement, and impact. I think in that area, you might find some of the things that you just described, Tim, like a methodology, article that you might propose. Like, hey, we've looked at different measures for, did you mention, you didn't say grit. I'm trying to remember what you just said there. Growth mindset. Okay. So we've done, we've looked at 3 different measures on growth mindset. We're doing a validity study on that, for that measure. Here's what we found. This one we found is, related to these other measures. This one's shorter, right? All of those kinds of things for those common outcomes that we might all be interested in, right? And it's this really in-depth empirical study around the measure. You also could have a more empirical article around the program, the intervention that you just described, and that, the entire assessment process, where you might talk about the program plan, the theoretical underpinnings, here's the measure, here's the outcomes of that measure, right? Here's the outcomes of that program, and that either informs improvement needs or it demonstrates impact, or maybe both of those things, right? So it might be an empirical study along those lines. Then we have a third section that's called Inquiry, Improvement, and Impact in Action. And here, I think we can sometimes, and we all have this, and I'll use a personal example at my campus, because this is what Alice and Caleb and I talked about. I said, we did a move-in study, right? Like a move-in experience survey, right? And we all do those at our campuses, like for housing, and how long are they? And what have we actually learned or done with them? And I've never really seen anything be learned or done from those surveys personally. But a couple years ago, working with university housing, we asked a few different questions. We asked, were your 3 of the 50 questions, and it probably was not 50, but it felt like a lot, right? But 3 of the questions, one was, were your expectations around move-in met? Yes, no. Another question, somewhere else, did you have a bin? How many bins did you have? And the third question we ended up finding was helpful was, did you have volunteer help? And those three questions were like critical. We were able to almost fully explain. We had 10% of people whose expectations weren't met. 90% of people's expectations were met. But the 10% of people, and that could be like an impact story, right? Like people's expectations were met. Maybe students didn't change from that. We can get into that theoretical debate, but a good story that our Division of Student Affairs might want to share. But then if we dig in on that 10%, we found that of the 10%, they either did not have bins to use during move-in and or did not have volunteers. And that almost fully explained the 10%. So with that, just those three questions, we could advocate for buying additional bins or renting bins, or we were able to go back because this was like post-COVID and our volunteer support with move-in had dwindled a little bit. And we were able to go back and say, that volunteer matters. You matter if you step in and volunteer. It makes a difference. And here's the data to show it. And now we're doing that study again with just three questions now to see if our increase in volunteer support moves the needle on decreasing the small number of people whose expectations weren't met, right? That to me, I'm like, where do I get that from another practitioner? Because I just want some tools sometimes to like pick up. You know, I'm an office of one, and I would love to like get Jordan and Alyssa's things that they're doing like great stuff at UNC Charlotte and be like, what are they doing? I just want to like pick up and go with something like that we're all doing, but they have found to be super helpful. It's more than a SAL blog, but it's not quite to the level of an empirical study because I'm not going to have theoretical underpinnings around these three questions. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not that kind of level, but it's an actionable, measure. It's an actionable, good, strong assessment process that helped us with improvement that like, we don't really have that space to share those kinds of good tidbits as a field. So this inquiry, improvement, and impact in action is for those small, important, impactful assessment, process projects you're doing on your campus that you're like, I wish I could shout this to the rooftop to everybody. That's what we want to be able to do there. And the fourth for the sections is a media review section, so we were broader in that, right? It's not just a book review, but a media review. So we can talk about podcasts, we could talk about, books that have come out. If there's some student affairs assessment radio station out there, I'd love to know that too, or, but a little bit bigger scope than just book reviews, right? Because we know there's a lot more ways things are happening out there. So those are the kinds of manuscripts that we're looking for. That make sense, or proposal?
That's very helpful, and it's exciting to know like the breadth. Yeah, because I think that we all are often siloed in our work, so it's great that there's this outlet where we can sort of learn. What are the folks at UNC doing? What are the folks at other schools doing? Right. And if I could just ask a quick follow-up question. So that third category on the impact and action, is that to say that some articles might not even have data in them? It could just be like, here's an idea, or here's what we have found to be a useful set of incentives, or we've tried different ways to market our surveys.
100%.
We hold town halls to get student input on how we construct a survey and hear the pros and the cons or the logistical things to consider. Right. It's just a way to generate and inspire ideas.
Yeah. And even in that, there might be little pieces of data, right? Like by doing this different approach, we increased our survey response rate by 15%. I want to know that, I want to know how people are doing that. And I kind of want that to live in perpetuity, like that then we have scholarship to build off of each other, right? But right now it might be happening in those awesome virtual coffee conversations, but it's not somewhere that's really accessible for new people coming into the field or people that might not be able to have that coffee conversation with colleagues or are struggling to connect. where do we kind of create that where we're building that scholarship together as a field? And there's great assessment processes and pieces of the assessment process that are occurring on campuses. So we are super excited about this kind of article that will be focused on in the journal. And that's where I think, like, I'm guessing most people in this space right now lead assessment at their institution, at their division. This is where you can go to that person in your campus activities office who's crushing it, and you want to help say, you're crushing it. And if you said to them, there's this journal that has this great way for you to write something, and I think we could do this together, you would not only help the field, you would help elevate that person, right? And you would help pull them up, because they would feel so good that you think that that is something that they can do and should do, right? I mean, I can't imagine before getting into this editorial role or getting into student affairs assessment, when I was just a young practitioner super geek, if somebody came to me and said that, I'd have been like, oh my gosh. And I would have it would have made my year for somebody to pull me in like that. And I think you all are in positions to do that with people on your campuses. And this can be that way to get them in without it feeling like this add-on where they have to do some dissertation or something like that for a lit review. But let's just write about this good thing that we did, almost the assessment report we wrote on our campus, but let's make it consumable for other people in the field.
Let me piggyback on some things Heather said, and specifically to Tim's comment and then a chat from Merrill. Tim, I would see your potential idea there as maybe within field notes. Maybe that's kind of off the top. We could, negotiate that. But I'm thinking particularly in making that suggestion of Merrill's comment about, I really like the field notes idea. It reminds me of the Dear Colleagues publication. What we're looking for is conversations, for lack of better terms, in the trenches among colleagues. I don't like the war imagery there, but things you'd say while you're both looking at the same thing, how to do it. And then bouncing it back several paragraphs to your comment about the chemistry outcome and sense of belonging and all of that, to your just sort of draft idea about that article. I would push the envelope further, Tim. I would push the envelope to, and what would you then do with these results? For example, hypothetically, what could the chemistry department do to increase students' sense of belonging? Draw on whatever they're already doing. Draw on, I don't know, teaching chemistry to undergrads, literature that surely must be out there, maybe it's in blogs, about what are other chemistry departments doing, and draw on what sense of belonging and what other departments are doing. Offer some ideas. You don't have to promise that you'll implement the ideas, right? That'd be cool, but not a requirement. But push it to, what do we do with these results? What's the potential impact? And thirdly, I would particularly call out community college colleagues. There are at least two of you here on this call, I see by your titles. But one of the most impactful chapters in a book, a New Directions for Student Services publication that I worked on recently, was a chapter by community college colleagues. They were doing great work. And one of those authors, I think it was 3 or 4 authors, served as a sort of quarterback and drew his colleagues together to write a fabulous chapter on an assessment project within the community college space. Community colleges are doing great work. It's a little different than the 4-year private or public or whatever. It's different, but it's highly impactful. Let's get out there and tell your story.
Does that help with the kinds of articles we're looking for? All right, so then that brings us to the submission and review process. And this is where a little bit, I think it's important to say, becoming the editor of this journal has been like pulling back the curtain in the Wizard of Oz. Do you know what I like? Before doing this, it was really just a need of Sal for somebody to serve in this role. And I remember being like, I don't know that I'm the right person to do that. You know, I'm not sure. I don't think you want me. And then they were like, no, we want you. We think you could do this. And I'm kind of like, okay, I haven't really written yet. I just finished my Ph.D. And so I say that because I think I always had this assumption of like how smart or how published you had to be or how much you needed to know to do anything. And I just really want to make sure that we pull people in. One of my biggest things, and I just taught at Western Carolina University for their basically student affairs assessment class, and in like debriefing the class, one of the students said to me, you know, I knew what self-efficacy was before I started this class, but I have never seen a faculty have that as such a priority, that you have made sure that if we say we can't do it, that we're putting a yet on the end of that we believe at the end of this class that we can. And I think that's a motto and a value I have for anything. And that's how I feel about this journal, is that if you've never published before, you can. If you've never thought you have something to say, you do. And this journal can be the space for you, and it can be the space for people in your division. So saying that, one of the things I had come up, if you attended, I think it was in October, I did a structured conversation on my recent publication with the new directions of student services. And I had come up with a multi-level assessment process, and I don't want to get into that here. But what I do want to say is I had been sitting on that, and people had said, you should publish this. You should publish this. I was like, I don't have time to write a manuscript. I had like a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old running around my house, and I had a full-time job, and we hit COVID, and I see Bree like shaking her head and like, right, like, let's be real, if your mom's out there, you got sick kids on you all the time, like life was tough. I could not write something, and I didn't have a writing community. I wasn't supported in my job to do something like that. It's not part of my job. It is an extra. It is night work. It is weekend work. And all of a sudden, Alice Mitchell and Dr. Kelly Dixon were co-editing a new Directions of Student Services book. And a call came out for article proposals. And I was like, well, I could write a proposal. That's just like an ASPA proposal or an ACPA proposal. I do those all the time. I could write a proposal and they could give me feedback, you know, and maybe then this kind of creates some goalposts for me and creates community for me to get this thing that I've always wanted to write done. And lo and behold, it was accepted. So I fully would never have written that article if it weren't for the process that Alice and Dr. K had developed for that issue of New Directions of Student Services. And so when Caleb and Alice came on, and I'm going through like the hamster wheel of how the journal had always been done, like lots of other journals, you know, it's a full manuscript. It felt very faculty centric, that you had to write the full manuscript and then it was going to be like critiqued and you didn't even know if it would get published. Who has time for that when it's giving up nights and weekends with your family, right? Or your life, or whatever that is, when you're already working 50 hours for the job that you're getting paid salary to do, that's not supporting your writing. And so, and I always felt, even on the editorial side of that, I always felt like there was never time off with the journal. And I was on whatever author's timeline. So if an author submitted something on December 15th, it didn't matter that winter break was coming and my holiday season with my family was coming. I had 4 weeks to get a reviewer assigned to that, get that turned around, which put the burden on my reviewers too. And it just got to like when Alice and Caleb came on, I was like, why do we do this? Why do we make it harder on ourselves? It's like I coach baseball. Alice knows this. I coach baseball and people are like, where's the snack sign up? And I said, can't you bring your kids snacks yourself? Like, why do we have to make it harder on ourselves that we have some like sign up that everybody has to do and you have to think about what everybody likes? If your kid needs a snack, bring them a snack, you know, like, why do we make it harder on ourselves? And so it really got to like, gosh, I loved that process that Alice and Dr. K made. Can we do that? What if we did that? What if we just did the proposal and then we support people through writing their drafts and giving them feedbacks on their drafts and we help them run the race and cross the finish line successfully and lift them up and through the process? And they were like, yeah, why don't we do that? And I mean, it was more than that, right? But we just kind of were like, let's do that. So that's really what this new submission and review process is. You do not have to write an entire manuscript that will then be graded. What we want is a NASPA ACPA proposal that's thought out, right? But is something that is manageable, that respects your time, and supports you to write in this field and in this work. So on the 15th, that's what we shared in the blog post, is that we want to see that proposal of what your article would be, right? And we might, I'm not saying this would be, but you know, we might get these proposals and it might be like, wow, you know, you've submitted, this one individual has submitted a proposal about this idea that might be akin to this one other person that submitted a proposal. Would y'all like to co-author something, right? So we might be able to support building that community in the field, and just support through the process. So Alice, anything to add to that?
Nothing. I think you've said it really, really well, Heather. Thanks.
And so once then, you know, that proposal is submitted by January 15th, Alice and I as editors will go through and look at the proposals. What makes a good story for this issue based on the proposals that have been submitted, right? Maybe the story for issue 1 is this set of proposals, but wow, this other proposal is really good. Maybe that inspires the next issue that we do. So, hey, could you know, we want you to do this, but this is really inspired what the topic of the next issue we want to center around. So, you know, we're pivoting there. So it's really an opportunity for us to also look at an overall story we're telling with the journal, for the field and about the field. And so we'll have like, hey, draft 1 is due here. Our reviewers can then plan, okay, this is the month that I'm reviewing this article, right? And that's going to be an open process between authors and reviewers. It's no longer going to be like the social media anonymous comments. Not that our reviewers were disrespectful in any ways like that, right? But you understand what I'm saying, like that it's an open conversation between our authors and the reviewers. And so we'll have a couple of timelines, and then our goal is to get the issue out in December of this year.
Let me jump in on that comment then, Heather. One of the things Renee has commented, I feel like this process is more equitable too. And then you, Heather, have commented on journal issues being stories, a collection of articles that tell a story across those. Heather, we haven't talked about this, but I'll put it out as an idea and hope I'm okay on that. I think we'd also be open to ideas about journal issue storylines and who could be contributors to that storyline. That's kind of how the new directions for student services issue went. Dr. K and I got together and said, what do we want to bring to the field in terms of student affairs assessment now? and who could write on some of those themes. So if you're out there in one of those pixels and there's a story that should be told or brought up front or elevated, pitch that to us. Think
And be
about
a
who else could
co-editor.
write. Oh yeah,
Be a
pitch that
co-editor
to
on
us.
that issue. Yeah.
Yeah, pitch that to us and tell us, who might be interested, or maybe you want to make them anonymous, but just describe them in terms of their institution and, sort of demographic kind of stuff. And let's talk about it together. Do it.
Yeah. Questions around that process? I saw a lot of hearts and a lot of claps from the little screens. Again, I'm just going to say that out loud because I know this is being recorded and that's not always captured in the recording, but I'm seeing a lot of nonverbals and images from attendees today that these are some positive directions that we're going in that y'all are feeling. Yep, seeing heads nod. Okay. Well, on that, I've got in the blog post that you saw, we're holding some kind of office hours during the 12 to 1 lunch hour on Eastern time. So anytime next week, drop in, reach out via email. A great example of the way the journal and SAL are still connected is if you go to the SAL homepage, the journal is still at the top in the navigation. It will redirect you to our site with Indiana University and the Center for Leading Improvements in Higher Education. Yes, I will. I'll share that link if somebody could help me. Someone just chatted the link for my office hours. It's my personal Zoom link at App State, and I'll stick around here a minute. But yeah, so if you go to the SAL website, you can get to the journal website. We have created a LinkedIn page. So please follow us and engage in conversation there. We have a good little following so far for being a few weeks old. We've gotten out of the Twitter X space. I don't even know what that's called now because I'm not hip, but that seems way too hot. So we're gonna engage on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
Bree, I see your hand raised. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Bree.
Sorry, I just had a question. I know, Renee, I know that you're connected to the Grand Challenges and Assessment group. I'm sure other folks have been too. I know I've been part of one of the groups focused on co-curricular assessment, but it has not, I feel like, been integrated with SAL very much. And so I'm thinking about just opportunities here, even to as these initial conversations are happening, how that might fuel research or innovation or connection with that area. I guess I'm wondering if that's been discussed at all with other groups working on assessment, especially related to student affairs and co-curricular areas.
Yeah. Renee, do you want to comment on that?
So SAL has representation on the Grand Challenges, but it's been very quiet for some time. I think that there were some leadership changes, but I can follow up. I did have a conversation probably about 8 months ago, but I can definitely follow up because I definitely think there's opportunities for intersections there as well. And SAL is pretty well positioned with other. One of our intentions this past year has been to outreach with other assessment organizations, the Council for Advancement of Standards, NASPA's Assessment, Evaluation, and Research Knowledge Community, as well as the ACPA Commission on Assessment and Evaluation. So we're trying to connect with them as well. And Grand Challenges is also one of the other ones that we connect with. So I'll follow up. I'll put it on my to-do list to see what's happening on that front, but there are opportunities.
But in thinking about the connection with the journal on that Grand Challenges front, I'm not really sure where the publication space is for that, right? Even I think a lot of time, and I have no idea. I'm going to say I know nothing. I know the name, and I know a couple people that are involved. But this could be a great place for things along those lines to reach kind of a different audience. That'd be great. So I think sometimes there's places where we share things via presentation or, things, but, this could be a great way to kind of cement that in scholarship space if that's, of interest.
I want to add just a couple of pieces. Number one, Heather, just for the margins of things, I see a question in the chat from Kim, one of at least two community college folks out there. And Kim is asking, what are we looking for in terms of reviewers? So let me put that on the side for just a moment. And then let me bounce back then, Heather, to your comment about presentations and publication spaces and all of that. For so many of us, articles start with maybe a conversation at a water cooler or the cookies in the break room, right? Okay, it might start at a conversation there. It might start at a presentation that then you think, wow, I ought to maybe like write that down. So I wonder if we could get used to thinking of this as a sort of pipeline from the cookies, right? The cookies in the break room and those conversations up to a conversation with Heather and Alice at office hours, to a proposal, et cetera, et cetera. It's really just a pipeline, starting with the cookies in the break room. So with that, I bounce back to Kim's question in the chat about what are you looking for in terms of reviewers? I'm sort of pitching that, Heather, if you'd rather answer that during office hours, that's cool.
Oh, with reviewers, if that's of interest to you, I'd say just kind of reach out and let me know. Right now, we're kind of figuring out where our current reviewers are in the process. But if you're like, you know what, I can't write right now, or, maybe that's another year down the line because my kid is 2, they're too much on my hip and I need another year, but I could review something, and that's how you want to contribute to the field. Reach out, let me know.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather and Alice, for coming today and bringing so much energy and expertise. I know that this has been a long time of planning, a lot of conversations, but I really think this new inclusive approach to the journals really going to spark some interest in people who maybe haven't published. I am not a super publisher, so I'm excited to maybe add my voice to the pot. So I highly encourage everybody to do that as well. So I posted in the chat for our next structured conversation, but this session was recorded. We'll share it out on the listserv, as well as any links to the materials that we referenced during today's conversation. But I'll leave it to Alice and Heather. Any final words of wisdom, any final words, thoughts?
I'm excited to see your proposal, Renee, and everybody else's. So I'm excited. I'm calling you in, we're calling you in. And so I'm going to end with, we'll talk soon.